You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Well, today we are going to be celebrating Juneteenth. Now, if you've been on Mars and you don't know what Juneteenth is, believe me, you will by the end of this podcast. It's a joyous celebration of emancipation of the slaves, formerly enslaved people who finally, quite a while after the event, learned that they were free, and all the fascinating stories that go with that. My special guest for today is Dr. Janet Dewart Bell, who is my sister on the board of the Women's Media Center and is herself many exciting things: a social justice advocate, an activist, an executive coach, an Emmy and Peabody Award winner in broadcasting, and more good things about that later. But for now, let's get started, and we really this time have to go inside the headlines. Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day, Jubilee Day, and Emancipation Day, is now a formal holiday nationwide, celebrating the emancipation of people formerly enslaved in the United States. The 155-year-old holiday originated in Galveston, Texas, but is now annually celebrated on June 19th across the country with, at last, official recognition. It commemorates the anniversary of June 19th in 1865 in Texas, when Union Army General Gordon Granger arrived accompanied by 2,000 Union troops to proclaim freedom from slavery. Now, this was well over 2 years after Abraham Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and it was over 2 months after Robert E. Lee formally surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox. Lincoln himself had been assassinated some months earlier in April 1865. Enforcement of the proclamation and the news generally depended on the advance of Union troops. Texas was the most remote of the states where enslavement was still practiced, and planters and other slaveholders had migrated there from eastern states to escape the Civil War fighting, and they brought with them many enslaved people, increasing the slave population exponentially, so much so that in the state, by 1865, there were an estimated 250,000 enslaved persons in Texas. Furthermore, Texas had a low presence of Union troops as the Civil War ended, so enforcement there was slow and inconsistent. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation declared an end to the institution of slavery in the Confederate States, it remained legal and was practiced openly in 2 Union border states, Delaware and Kentucky, until the end of 1865, when the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, abolishing chattel slavery nationwide. In addition, Native American territories that had sided with the Southern Confederacy, namely the Choctaw, were the last to release enslaved people in 1866. Yet it still was a case-by-case snail's progress, because the freedom of formerly enslaved people in Texas was given final legal status, if that, only by a series of Texas Supreme Court decisions made as late as 1874. Celebrations date from then on, first involving church community gatherings in Texas. They then spread across the South and became great food festivals over the years, while attempting to avoid the commercialization usually attendant on national holidays. Juneteenth is also celebrated by the Muskogee people, descendants of the Black Seminole tribe, who had escaped from U.S. slavery in 1852, Native Americans who settled in Coahuila, Mexico. Freedmen in Texas organized the first of what would become the annual celebration locally of Jubilee Day, and I do mean freedmen, because of course women were not yet enfranchised or in any way empowered. The freedmen's bureaus were sometimes regarded as a bit controversial. Were they collaborating with the institution of white supremacy, or were they actually working for progress for the black community and everyone else? In any event, they did often hold political rallies to give voting instructions to newly freed enslaved men. Yet in many cities in Texas, black people were barred by Democrats from using public parks for assemblies and voter registration instructions. So across parts of the state, freedmen pooled their funds to purchase land on which to assemble, rally, organize, and hold Juneteenth celebrations. In 1872, formerly enslaved people collected $800 and pooled it to buy 10 acres of land for such use, naming it Emancipation Park, just outside Houston, where it remains the state's oldest public park to this day. In her superb new book, which is part memoir, On Juneteenth, she calls it, by Annette Gordon Reed, herself a Texan and the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning book The Hemmings of Monticello, An American Family, points out the waves of attempts by the black community to organize in Texas and the manner in which the very names of places were changed in order to circumvent that. For example, Booker T. Washington Park, previously a large black community park, became simply and mysteriously Washington Park after Juneteenth, so that you couldn't know whether it was named for George or Booker T, because now white people went there. In fact, this was just the beginning of the rollbacks. Texas and all former Confederate states passed new constitutions or amendments effectively disenfranchising black people and solidifying and entrenching Jim Crow laws. Texas, which had been variously claimed by 5 countries, France, Spain, Mexico, the U.S., as well as by the Confederacy during the Civil War, was right in there denying black progress all along. From 1836 to 1845, it even had its own history as a separate, independent nation, the Republic of Texas, which boasted its own Declaration of Independence, largely stolen from Jefferson's, but with the language of equality conveniently cut out. Waves of revenge punishments, lynchings, burnings, and other atrocities followed in the wake of the first Jubilee celebrations. Nevertheless, Juneteenth spread, and from 1940 through 1970, in the second wave of the Great Migration, more than 5 million black people left Texas, Louisiana, and elsewhere in the South for the North and the West Coast, bringing Juneteenth Day with them. In 1996, Barbara Rose Collins, Democrat of Michigan, was the first to sponsor legislation recognizing Juneteenth Independence Day in the U.S. House of Representatives. It's taken all this time for it to become official. It's time for our first break, but we will return in just a moment with my guest for today, Janet Dewart Bell, and with full celebration of Juneteenth coming up in just a minute. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My special guest today is Janet Dewart Bell. She is a communications strategist and management consultant with a multimedia background, as well as experience in policy advocacy, strategic planning, fund development, media training, and education. She's a social justice advocate and activist. With a doctorate in leadership and change from Antioch University, she is also the author of Lighting the Fires of Freedom, African American Women in the Civil Rights Movement, from the New Press. Among her accomplishments are an Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement and programming for National Public Radio, honored with a Peabody Award, considered the highest award in broadcasting. As director of communications at the National Urban League, she was the league's chief communications strategist and editor of the State of Black America. She established the Dewart Bell Lecture Series on Race in American Society at the New York University School of Law, and she is the founder and president of Lead Intergenerational Solutions, Incorporated, a nonprofit dedicated to developing intergenerational leadership as social change agents. She serves on the boards of Cancer Care, the Southern Center for Human Rights, and she is the chair of the Women's Media Center Board of Directors. Here is Janet Dewart Bell. Janet, welcome to the program. It's so good to have you here.
I am so pleased to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my delight. Well, we are celebrating Juneteenth, and it's about time. It's been a long time coming. You wrote a piece for the Women's Media Center, where you are the chairwoman of the board of directors, to my great delight. You wrote a piece last year about Juneteenth in which you talked about the development of the holiday. Talk a little bit about that piece, because it's so interesting.
Yes, well, I am so pleased to have had the opportunity to write that piece, Juneteenth, When Will We Be Free? And I just wanted to repeat something that I wrote at the beginning so that we keep in mind that it is a solemn observation mixed with optimism, hope, and joy, symbolism with substance. And as I said then, please, y'all, no Juneteenth sales. Let's about the substance of it so that that does not get lost in the celebration, which we should have, of course, for Juneteenth. But then, as now, we have to turn the symbolism into reality. It's still a process. You know, being declared free does not necessarily mean that you are free, and we see systemic racism still existing and all those things, so that we still know that we have work to do.
Oh, God, yes. God, yes. Well, you know, the gap, even between the Emancipation Proclamation and for that matter, a little later, Robert E. Lee's finally surrendering to Ulysses Grant at Appomattox, the gap after the Emancipation was 2 years.
Yes.
And then there was an additional 2 months, just over 2 months after Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. And I was thinking the other day, Janet, oh my God, what if you were one of the people, I was one of the people who got killed in that gap? It didn't matter to us whether we had already been declared free. It didn't matter to us whether, Lee had not yet surrendered or had surrendered. I mean, we just fell in the hole, in the gap, in the time window. The suffering went on, and it went on all this time until in Texas, all this time after emancipation, finally enslaved people were told, oh, by the way, yeah, you're free. And then they had to send in government troops to ensure that. It takes your breath away. Go ahead.
It does take your breath away. And I haven't been able to actually fact-check this independently, but I read recently, within the last few days, that it was really black soldiers who delivered the news. And we forget about that. You know, sometimes they think it's it's the great white father or something syndrome coming in. But remember, there were black soldiers that fought on the side of the Union.
Yep.
And so I have this imagination, I have no facts to support it, that they said, wait a minute, we have to let people know, let my people go, that they are free, that this has been done.
Yeah, yeah. Well, can't you just imagine at the same time while you're imagining? Because I have a feeling that this anecdotal imagination is closer to fact than we might think. Imagine that you're one of the people who heard a rumor. Maybe you were back east. Maybe you had not got out of the fighting over the Civil War. Maybe you heard that this had happened and you made it your way to Texas and you were telling people all this time in the intermediate time and later, by the way, we've been emancipated. Hello. And people thought you were crazy. People laughed at you. People thought you were a loon. Maybe sometimes you were carted off to the loony bin. I mean, the suffering that goes on behind the scenes, behind the scrim of the theater is so staggering. And all those lives lost and all those people ignored, including the black soldiers who may very well have brought the truth. It doesn't sound like many of the white soldiers might have. It's stunning, isn't it? I mean, it's just staggering.
It is. You and I like to use imagination, so I sometimes imagine that white people, certain white people, knew about it in advance, and so you have these black people who are still, quote, enslaved, overhearing dinner conversation or what have you, and going, "What does that mean?"
Yeah,
and no one would tell them the truth. No one would fess up until it was so obvious that they could no longer deny what had happened.
Right.
So Juneteenth is a very special time, and it's interesting that black people had to keep it alive, keep the idea of Juneteenth alive. I remember decades ago when it was first brought to my attention, and I thought it was brought to my attention relatively late, people thought, well, what's the significance of it? Why should we celebrate that? But as you just said, the significance is just without a doubt. But it's just you get so I guess thinking about things in a regular in a way that doesn't talk about the human suffering, the human impact, the hope that people have, and how that hope can either be fulfilled or denied. And to keep the idea of Juneteenth alive, the generations upon generations of black people kept that idea alive. And now what we will have is a national remembrance, a holiday, which I hope will be that and will not just be something that will be just another day to take off from work and to have some sort of sale, but maybe we can come to reckoning with our country's history of racism and oppression so that we can move forward. We can't move forward until we can realistically look back at what our past has been.
Precisely. And Janet, it's also not, I think it was Faulkner who said the past isn't behind us. The past isn't even past. I mean, it still is completely alive. In your piece for the Women's Media Center, in your features piece, you cited two examples. One of that Reagan had chosen Neshoba to make one of his announcements, a major announcement when president, and of course
he launched a special bid. Neshoba County, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan in 1964.
Right.
That was very intentional. It was not an accident.
That's not a dog whistle. That's a tuba. And it was James Chaney and Andy Goodman and Michael Schwerner. They were all in CORE at that time, Congress on Racial Equality, and I was as well. And I remember the wait in the New York office of court. Where were the bodies? Where were the people? Where were the for days and then weeks it went on until they were found brutally murdered. And then just last year, oh my God, Trump decided that he was going to have his rally on Juneteenth in Tulsa, where the so-called riots were on June 1st in 1921, and where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Black people had their homes destroyed, had their lives lynched, these are not dog whistles. This is the situation continuing until it's addressed at the core.
Yes, I want to send a note about Tulsa. Tulsa was considered so prosperous for the Black community there. It was called Black Wall Street.
Right.
And as with many of these incidents in the past that are called riots, what they really were massacres of Black people.
Right.
And they were reprisals not against Black people doing anything negative, but with Black people who had the audacity to succeed against all the odds. And so in Tulsa, as in other places, Rosewood, what have you, people were killed indiscriminately, men, women, and children, just because they were Blacks and they were present and they were, in the particular case of Tulsa, they were successful. And there were some people who did not want that to happen. And unfortunately, some of the people who might not have, some of the white people in particular, who might not have wanted to be a part of this, didn't rise up to oppose it. And so therefore, they, as in many cases, became complicit in this kind of massacre, this tragedy.
Well, the blowback, each time there has been an inch of progress, the blowback has been just stunning. It even after emancipation, even after General Granger's order in Texas, in Galveston, where Juneteenth supposedly started, the end of slavery, outright slavery in Texas, was not the end of the institution. That didn't happen officially in Kentucky and in Texas and in a number of other places until 1865, when the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified. Every step, so then there was progress, teeny bit of progress after, that was Reconstruction, and then slam, Reconstruction gets replaced by the Black Codes and by Jim Crow. And then a little bit of that, and then slam, segregation. The intrepidity of the viciousness is, it leaves me, as you can tell, babbling. So it just means that we have to be as or more intrepid, because that's the only way it's going to stop, isn't it?
Indeed, yes. And also a few days ago, it was surprising to me that the incoming head of the Southern Baptists, the reason there is a Southern Baptist convention is because the white Baptists were so opposed to slavery, so they started their own convention.
Right.
But the incoming president has refused to denounce critical race theory, which I think is an incredible thing, because you always have, in spite of all of what looks like and what is, challenges and which might be seen as hopelessness, you always have some glimmer of hope. And I want to quote Brian Stevens, who always says, hopelessness is the enemy of social justice. So you have signs like this. And so maybe while you are hopeful and you have signs, you have to keep working all the time. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You've got to always be moving forward, and you've got to fight. For example, in our time, all this voter suppression things,
right.
Worse than voter suppression. That's almost a polite word to call it. I call it full frontal fascism.
Yeah,
where you would try to take over, not only suppress the vote, but these so-called conservative, which are radical right-wing legislatures, are trying to pass laws where they can overturn the results of elections. We know this, but that is devastating. That is so anti-democratic. While they wave the flag, if they're not using the flagpoles to attack demonstrators,
Exactly.
and police officers at the Capitol in Washington D.C. But it's absolutely incredible how we have to keep vigilant, keep hopeful, and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, it's tiring sometimes, but we can't afford to be tired. I remember Fannie Lou Hamer saying, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." She was the head of the Mississippi Freedom Delegation way back when in the 60s. We can't afford to be sick and tired. But this is an actual good weekend. This is a happy time. This is a celebration. You're quite right. Let's hope it doesn't all turn into hot sales, because the minute they realize, oh, big black market out there, let's get them in buying things. But let's hope it doesn't. And I do notice that they already have a Miss Juneteenth beauty contest, which makes me a little sad. Yeah, well, you can't. But maybe there will be young women who say, enough of this, we're not doing that, and get rid of it. In any event, it's a good thing. It's a very happy moment, and we have had so few of those in the past 5 or 6 years.
I'd like to celebrate something else as well.
Yeah.
As a journalist, I know that you took great note of this when the Pulitzer board gave a special award commendation to Darnella Frazier.
Yeah, yes.
She's only 18 now, and who had the courage to stand there and video that traumatic experience, the murder of George Floyd, right in front of her. I mean, she was just incredible, and to me, she follows in the spirit of Ida B. Wells, who last year, I think it was, a Pulitzer committee gave Ida B. Wells Barnett a posthumous Pulitzer Award. Ida B. Wells, who by herself would go and cover lynchings and things like that. I mean, these are some courageous people who are truth tellers, who want to see justice being done. So I want to lift those up.
Oh, I'm so glad that you did. And both of those, the Ida B. Wells Award and the Darnella Frazier, when she was just a baby, she was but I call gutsy baby, a courageous one. And when all the cops were arriving on the scenes, and she kept filming, and they said, put that away. And she kept filming. You know, she didn't know if her life would be taken from her, but she kept her little phone on. So these are the moments of the human spirit. You know, I
love that. The moments of the spirit. That's exactly what we need to focus on.
Well, I remember a long time ago in the South doing voter registration, and Selma and Mississippi as well, and all. And I remember there was a moment when Bull Connor, the horrifying sheriff, he had some kind of indigestive, or maybe it was even a heart attack, and he was in the hospital. And these tiny black children, 5 and 6 years old, pigtailed with their starched pinafores on and their shining, beautiful faces, came and knelt and prayed for him in the streets outside the hospital. And I remember thinking, my God, that is the human spirit at its highest. I can't even communicate what that means, the grace of that. And, of course, the police eventually came out and hosed them away with fire hoses. But that was another moment in the human spirit where you realize, whatever I do, it's not enough. So I guess I'll go back and do more, you know?
Yeah, we have to do more. Last week, I was in Mississippi. I was in Jackson and in Holmes County. And in Jackson, Mississippi, as you know, in 1963, Medgar Evers, on June 12th, was assassinated in his driveway essentially in front of his wife and 3 small children.
That's right, his wife and kids, yeah.
30 years to bring his killer to justice. There were 2 trials that did not end, what's the word for it? Mistrials, 2 mistrials. And finally, this person whose name I try never to mention was convicted.
Yes.
But and so I had dinner with Rena Evers, who is the daughter of Medgar Merle Evers, and we remember, too, that they were partners. So when you mentioned Medgar Evers, I mentioned Merle Evers, who is the interview in my book. But flying into Jackson, Mississippi, I talk about having a moment of a very emotional moment. I flew into what is now the Jackson Medgar Wiley Evers International Airport.
Oh.
And I looked to see if other people on the plane understood the significance of that.
Wow.
And I don't think that they did, but I did.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I remember I will lift that up wherever I can. So there is a possibility of change, and we just have always worked for that one glimmer of light, and that's what we look for. We're always looking forward and upward.
Yes, we are. Oh, and thank you, Janet. Dear Janet, thank you so much for being with us today. Good luck with a new book, and onward and upward, yeah?
Well, thank you. You are a light in yourself. I was reading another book the other day, and they quoted you, and they quoted your title, of course, Sisterhood is Powerful, and indeed it is.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
We have to pause here for our final break, but then I'll be right back with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
What's not said can also be a part of fighting words. I admit to being an unabashed fan of the writings of historian Annette Gordon-Reed. Not only has she given us truly fine books about eras that have hitherto eluded historians, perhaps because they just weren't looking closely enough at, say, sexism or racism, but she also writes beautifully, has such a sharp mind, and she's so damned fair. In the small volume she's just published called On Juneteenth, she mixes memory, as in her own childhood, with objective history, as in the pre-slavery presence of black folk in Texas. In fact, she's from Texas, with all the ironies that implies. At one point, she quotes W.E.B. Du Bois in The Souls of Black Folk, as he identified the central dilemma facing black citizens in the United States, that to a great degree blackness and Americans have been cast in opposition to one another, a predicament created by the details of history and by the desires of others. Thus he wrote, in, gendered language, quote, "One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder." Close quote. Well, you can imagine what Annette Gordon-Reed really does with that. It also sent me down another rabbit hole in pursuit of similes and metaphors that both do and don't reinforce each other. Think, for example, about the triple warring elements held together by sheer fortitude in being American, black, and female, or American Latina and female, or American Asian and female, or American Indigenous and female, or even American European and female. In other words, just add female onto the end of that, and you get an entirely different, whole new sensibility, a whole new suffering, a whole new set of problems, setbacks, defeats, triumphs, griefs, joys. This naturally can be held true for adding any oppression at the end of that list: old, disabled, same-sex loving, etc. So are we all, in some strange, glued-together fashion, Americans. That this makes it all the more hilarious and insane for some people to refer to, quote, real Americans as coming from Crawford, Texas, close quote, as George W. Bush once said, or for the Trumpists to cling to their phantom image of that American as white, male, pot-bellied, middle-aged, and, sorry, but in some senses it's true, unsalvageably stupid. In the 60s and 70s, from the Civil Rights Movement and its training, for the second time in American history, the women's movement was born, just as suffrage and the struggle for women's enfranchisement had emerged from the movement to abolish slavery. In those years, we frequently had to resort, uncomfortably, to, quote, making the black analogy. That is, not making comparisons between sexism and racism, and not engaging in appropriation, but carefully pointing out similarities in, for example, resistant responses, like, don't you people just want to reverse things? Or, aren't you going too far this time? Or, do you really hate, fill in the blank, white people or men, and other such nonsense? As the women's movement came into its adulthood, there was less of a necessity to draw linking lines between these breathtakingly dumb reactions to any human progress in terms of race or sex. Then, just a few weeks ago, I overheard a young black woman passionately arguing with a young black man and using the analogy in reverse. Look, she sputtered intensely, don't you see that a white guy, without even thinking about it, just takes up space like a man in an elevator or a subway seat, spreading himself out from a sense of entitlement? I smiled to myself. It doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, and it certainly doesn't mean reversal, and it definitely doesn't mean that women have arrived. But it does mean that more and more people are all the time making the connections. Still, the problem and the tensions within all of these multiple selves, wow, that is considerable amount of work. It may be a long time yet to come before we Americans will be able to equally celebrate June 19th and July 4th with the same heartfelt celebration. And that doesn't even engage the fact that some of us, perhaps more and more of us, in the words of Virginia Woolf, have no country, because our country is the whole world. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. That's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.